Okay, so hopefully by now you understand that the British and the French in the end of the 18th century, the British and French have been at war, and the George Washington and John Adams are preferring to stay neutral and remain neutral in this fight, and this is causing problems because the British are seizing American ships that are headed to France, and the and obviously we don't like that. And so what ends up happening is Jay's Treaty. And the French feel like, hey, you've just, we were allies and now we're at war and you go and make a treaty with the British. And so they were upset about it. They felt like it favored the British, which there is some points to that. But the United States was trying to remain neutral in the fight. Well, now after Jay's Treaty, the French kind of start doing the same thing that the British had been doing. They began to seize American ships that are headed to Britain. And so John Adams sends diplomats to Paris to discuss the rights of neutral nations and to say, hey, you can't do this. And so the French foreign minister sends basically some agents to offer Americans a deal. The agents say, hey, we need $250,000 and then a $10 million loan to France before we're really even going to talk about this. So this is obviously not acceptable, and Adams, comes back and tells Congress what's going on, and because and he called the French agents X, Y, and Z, and so I guess to kind of keep that some of that information hidden. And this becomes known as the XYZ Affair. And, all of a sudden, America has been predominantly kind of in favor of the French and helping the French and really upset with John Adams and the Federalist and John Adams in particular, for remaining neutral. And all of a sudden now, because of, the way the French have handled this situation, they are not, the country is supporting John Adams and believes he is, they see him kind of as their leader, and this is the most popular he really ever is as the president. And the country says, we won't pay the bribe, and Adams refused to ask Congress to declare war on France, though. While all of a sudden now a lot of Americans are like in favor of war with France. Adams still prefers neutrality. He doesn't. Adams and Washington neither have believed that the United States was prepared to go to war with either Britain or France, and so that's still the case. Adams strengthens the Navy, though. He begins building frigates, and these are fast-sailing ships with many guns. They're large sailing vessels, and these frigates are excellent. These 6 frigates that they first build are really good, and it's not much of a navy compared to the British Navy, but it's the beginning. It's a really good beginning to the American Navy, and this is going to be kind of the response to the XYZ Affair. And it's one of the common sayings of the time was millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. And so this is known as the XYZ Affair. The French request, for us to even have a discussion about them stopping attacking our shipping, they, ask for basically a bunch of money. And so we refuse and decide we're going to start building up our Navy to protect our ships. Okay, so let's look at the Federalist Party split. And this happens really as a result of the incident with the XYZ Affair. Hamilton and his Federalist supporters want war with France after that, and Adams and his supporters don't. And so there's a divide over foreign policy in the Federalist Party, and that really ends up destroying the party. Hamilton really thinks that war with France is an important thing. He wants that to happen. Adams wants to avoid war with both France and Britain, so he's continuing his ideas of neutrality. And so this is what divides the party, this idea that, you can't have kind of the main leader, Alexander Hamilton of the Federalist, and the president, who is also Federalist, on opposite sides. And so the Federalist Party is divided and weak as a result of this, and therefore it's going to really cost cost Adams the presidency, among other things. There's some other serious issues that make him not likely to win re-election, and he doesn't. And so this is part of why he doesn't win re-election. So this split over how to deal with France is one big cause of the demise of the Federalist Party. And so during this time when there is all this hatred really that's starting to grow, and this distrust of France that's starting to grow, the newspapers today are not anything like newspapers back then. Back then, each side had, each party really had their newspapers that supported their views. They weren't, they didn't try, they weren't really even trying to be objective. They were taking sides in the newspapers, and so newspapers would say all sorts of horrible things about the other side, and they would make up stories and do all sorts of things that made that were really really would, if you saw in the paper today, you'd be really surprised that somebody would write something like that. And some of it was just outright lies and falsehoods and things of that nature. Well, during this crisis, the Federalist Party, and because of this, there was this crisis with France. There's some people that are believing, we need to do something about the newspapers. We need to do something about the papers, them writing about, the government, writing about the president and all the things that they're saying. And so we're going to pass the Sedition Act. And at the same time, there's a group of people, there are people that are, concerned about, the French that have been moving to the United States, and they feel like, hey, wait a second, this is dangerous. All these French people are here, and now all of a sudden this is going to be cause a problem. And so they pass what is known as the Alien Act. So we have the Alien Act and the Sedition Act that are passed and kind of formed together. They're not the same laws at all, but they are always, when discussed, they're almost always discussed together, even though they're completely different acts. But the Alien Act says that the president could expel any alien thought to be dangerous to the country, and then it also extends the number of years immigrants had to wait to become citizens. That goes from 5 years to 14 years. And so this is, this is one law that a lot of people are, start to say, wait a second, is this really what we want to do, the right way to handle things? And then the Sedition Acts, basically sedition means stirring up rebellion against a government. And so under the Sedition Act, citizens could be fined or jailed for criticizing the government or its officials in the newspapers. And some were. And they were put in prison and imprisoned for what they said in the newspapers in particular. And so this is a clear violation of the First Amendment rights. And so this is kind of a real dark mark, kind of a stain on Adams' presidency. These two laws are not seen nearly, are kind of his big mistakes that he makes. In trying to remain neutral, it seems in hindsight that he was making a wise choice, trying to avoid war, and he was able to successfully avoid war, and that was kind of his, he felt like his biggest accomplishment as president. But probably his biggest failure is agreeing to sign these laws, sign these bills into law and make them U.S. law. And when he loses, one of the first things Jefferson does is, people that had been put in jail under the Sedition Act are released. So the Alien Sedition Act's big problems, and then the Republicans have a response to it. And the response we're going to see is going to be a big problem in U.S. history as well. And the response to the Alien and Sedition Acts is this idea of states' rights. So Jefferson and the Republicans opposed those laws for good reason, and they argued that states had the right to nullify or cancel federal laws that they saw as unconstitutional. And so this is going to be an issue from this time all the way really until the Civil War, and to some extent even still today. You hear every once in a while people talking about states nullifying or canceling laws. And this is going to be key, because what's going on here is this because today we talk about, when we just talked about the government, we talk about the United States Supreme Court, having the right to declare laws unconstitutional. Well, that's called judicial review. That law doesn't really come in, idea has not been settled in the 1780s, 1790s, and even in the early 1800s. That idea is really first brought forward or really solidified in 1803, and we'll talk in a Supreme Court case called Marbury versus Madison. But at this time, it's not real clear who can determine if a law is constitutional or not. Some said, well, the legislative branch has to determine that, and if they vote in favor of it, then it is constitutional. And others said, no, the states get to decide that. And the states say it's unconstitutional, they can cancel it, and it's no longer valid in their state. And that's the idea behind the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which are written by Thomas Jefferson. These resolutions claim that each state has an equal right to judge for itself whether a law is constitutional. And if a state decides it is unconstitutional, they can then nullify that law in their borders. And so this is a big issue. This is do states have this right to nullify laws? Today, after the course of over 200 years, we've said, no, this pretty much isn't a right that states have. But in the very early days of our republic, that was not clearly decided, and it's not clearly defined in the Constitution, and so it has to be worked out. And the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions really are a problem. This idea that you can cancel federal law by each state, well, what you've done is you're basically saying if a state decides they don't like the law, they can just say, okay, well, it's unconstitutional, and we're going to cancel it. And so this is a way to kind of divide the country in a lot of ways, and this does become a big issue when we start to look at slavery and states wanting to nullify or cancel federal laws when it comes to slavery and limiting slavery or not limiting slavery. And so this is going to continue to be an issue in this course in U.S. history. And so we'll see this idea of nullification come back time and time again. So the Republican response to Alien Sedition Acts is to nullify, and that is through the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. All right, so that is the last part of this section on Washington and Adams and their presidencies.